And welcome back to Whiskey Politics. I'm Dave Sussman, and we are delighted to be here with Dave Spady at FreedomFest. And Dave is returning back to Whiskey Politics. We had you on last year at CPAC, and I think a lot's changed since that time. How are you feeling about things?
I'm feeling very positive. I think the president has done a great job with putting his agenda forth. I think the tax cuts and things that are having a tangible impact in a positive way on people's lives is terrific. And then how he's handled foreign policy issues, the issue with North Korea that he was given a lot of grief for. They thought that, calling Kim Jong-il Rocket Man was going to backfire, and that he was being too aggressive with him, but the posture worked, and it looks like we're on a completely different path with one of the biggest threats to our country in the world. So when you look at from a foreign policy and domestic policy standpoint, I think we're going in a great direction, and I think that will reflect in this year's midterm elections.
Now, you work in a lot of government affairs. You're a consultant to Salem Media, which is on how many stations across the country?
Well, it has programming on over 2,000 stations,
right,
from
and
a news service and talk shows, et
marquee
cetera.
names that most right-of-center types are listening to today. What do you think's happened to the media with this new president now?
Well, they're apoplectic, and they don't know how to handle him. They don't understand him. And even a lot of conservatives don't quite understand him. He does things differently. He's very disruptive, and that new paradigm they still haven't figured out after a couple of years. And I think the one thing that has changed is a lot of people that were calling for Trump to change his behaviors and to be somebody other than who he is. I think Corey Lewandowski got that right when he said, let Trump be Trump, and that was sort of the campaign motto they took on. And I think that is an important thing with him, because that's how he functions, and it's not going to change. His Twitter is not going to, suddenly go away, and things are not going to change in that regard. So I think he's doing a much better job than most people realize, and maybe even himself, as far as what he's been able to advance with his agenda. Democrats are doing everything they can to obstruct him. They're holding up appointments to agencies, critical appointments to agencies. They are attempting to hold up judges. We've had some success there because of rule changes that Democrats made themselves. And when you think about, looking back after this, first 2 years of his time in office, with 2 Supreme Court judges, with a major tax reform package that is improving our economy, strengthening our military. We haven't built a wall yet, but certainly from the standpoint of making our borders more secure, it's a priority, and we're doing things to make it more secure.
Yeah.
So I think it's a very positive time for us.
A lot of people in D.C. Every time you go on social media, you're standing next to some luminary. For the institutionalized politician, the person that has been there for 10, 20, 30 years, what is the general feeling in D.C. right now?
I think there's because they don't understand this dynamic with the president, and because a lot of the people that he's surrounded himself with were not part of the establishment. That there's a sort of this establishment camp that exists, and then there is the camp that is the non-establishment Trump camp. And I think some of them have sort of checked out. They're not as engaged as they used to be in things, and others who have been very engaged have sort of changed their tactics a little bit to come alongside the president and his agenda. So I think with the people that have been there a long time, there's also a fear that the reason that Trump was able to be successful as somebody completely outside the system coming in is something that could have an impact on them. And so they're, I think, maybe in some cases more tuned into public opinion than they've been in the past, because they sort of took things for granted. And when something disruptive like this happens, it makes them sit up and take notice.
Is there a shift happening? Listen, George Will was here. You still see Bill Kristol out there tweeting. I always say he's a nicer person in person than he is on Twitter. But there's still that intransigence within the Republican Party towards this president. But is there a shift outside of that group happening towards him?
I think inside that group, it's diminishing. I think that people are understanding that any fears they had about somebody coming in who might not know how to do the job or that he's going to do some crazy thing, they've realized that after almost 2 years, he's not done anything that's crazy. And he's done some very good things.
He's done the things that they've been calling for 40 years, that's the dichotomy with this. I mean, if you take a look at what George Will says in the Washington Post, he makes anybody that supports this president, the equivalent of what Hillary would call you. So, but he's doing things. Look at the judges, as you just talked about. You're big on regulatory state. You and I have spoken about this before. And we'll talk about California, but across the country, what is it, 22 regulations being repealed for every new one?
That's correct, yeah. Yeah, they've gotten rid of thousands and thousands of unnecessary regulations. They've really done a deep dive on that and said what is absolutely essential. If it's not absolutely essential, we're going to take it off the books.
Yeah. So how could you not applaud that as a conservative?
Right, yeah. Yeah, that's the odd thing, especially with guys like Kristol and George Will. These are very bright, competent people. And the fact that they don't like his style, the fact that they may not like whether or not he took a step in front of the Queen or did some other thing that wasn't quite how he was supposed to do it.
They took issue with that?
They didn't take issue with that, but I'm just using that as an example, where Trump did that yesterday and stepped out in front of the Queen, and there was all this outrage over his another foible from the president. But his agenda and the things he's accomplishing, I think they would all agree with and be supportive of. They just don't like his style.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about California. And those of us that know California well and have watched it devolve, we understand that what starts in California does move east, all right? So we're taking a look at a state right now. You've got on the November ballot, you've got a proposal to split the state into 3. What's going on here?
Well, first of all, there's a couple reasons why that's not going to be a reality. One is that the public polls on it show that it's not very popular, and so Tim Draper will have to spend an awful lot of money to try to change those numbers, and I just don't see it happening. So there's not a lot of support for it. Secondly, though, Congress would have to go along with that as well, and Congress is not going to go along with adding perhaps 5 or 6, or not adding. You'd be adding 3 to 4 Democrat senators.
Right.
And they're not going to go. The current powers that be in Washington D.C. are not going to go for something that would do that. So it
won't be ratified anyway.
Yeah, and look, I understand why Tim Draper put it on the ballot. California is immense, and as he says, it's unmanageable as it's currently run. And if you think about a state senator in California, we have 40 state senators and we have 53 members of Congress. So a state senator has a larger group that they represent than a member of Congress in California. Right. So it is something that if there was a way to break it up, it might be a good thing, but not break it up in a way that is just going to provide Democrats with more numbers in the U.S. Senate.
Okay. The desire to break it up comes from what, though? What do you see as Tim Draper's motivation?
It's the unmanageableness of a state that large, a state of 40 million people that takes in all these different, geographic regions that each have some different needs. But when you think about it, you have issues like water and other things that the state, in the south depends on water from the north, and so there's a dependency that you have within California that would be also disrupted by, breaking up into other states. But the Northern California in the Shasta, Redding and north of there, it's more like Montana than California in many respects. The rest of California. So if it were to be broken up, it really should be done in a way where it's more of a rural-urban breakup than a larger regional one.
We haven't spoken since before the primary. And we had a discussion on the governor's race about a year or so ago. Were you surprised at the results? You got Newsom on the extreme left, and you've got Cox, who took number 2.
I was Republican. A bit surprised. I think Cox he ran a great campaign. He was willing to, put his money where his mouth is, and he stepped up and spent the money necessary, because it's hard to get people to believe in you when you've, not been elected statewide or something else in California as a credible candidate. But he did a great campaign, And I think that really helps us. There's a lot of concern in California about 7 of the House seats where Republicans are running for re-election in districts that Hillary won, one of them by 15 percentage points. So the concern was that if the only thing driving people out in the general election is 2 Democrats at the top driving out their Democrat constituencies, that it would be very difficult for Republicans to energize their base and keep the enthusiasm up that you need in these elections. So that was a positive sign, not just from the standpoint of a potential governor, but also from the standpoint of these House races. And the other thing that is really important in this is if we don't have conservative ideals being talked about in the course of an election where the media's out, they're going to give both sides of what's going on, and if it were 2 Democrats, it would be, here's this liberal version and here's the leftist version, and these are our choices. Whereas now with Cox there, at least the ideals that we believe in are going to have a bully pulpit that will tell Californians, hey, there's another option here, and this is what it looks like. And so it's very important just from the standpoint of having conservative ideas talked about in an election cycle.
A lot of people don't realize this about California, but Trump got over 4 million votes, more votes for a Republican candidate for president than any other time in California history, right? Does Cox stand a chance?
Look, I hate to ever say never, but it's an uphill battle for him, and he recognizes that. And it's California. The Republicans are almost outnumbered by declined estates now, or maybe they even were just recently passed. So it's a state that...
And declined estate for people outside of California is the equivalent of filing independent.
Independent voters are, if not surpassing Republicans, they soon will. So in a state like that, Steve Poizner, is running as an independent. Steve is the former state insurance commissioner. He ran as a Republican in the past. Now he's running as an independent to figure out if running as an independent will allow center-right candidates to get elected statewide. Interesting thing with that race in the primary was that his home is in the San Jose area, Santa Clara County, and when he won in the past as a Republican, he didn't win that county. He just won that county in this primary, and he got more votes than any Republican has ever had in the Bay Area. So there still is a problem with the R in California on a ballot designation in certain parts of the state. So Steve may be onto something. And I think that has Democrats nervous, not just in California but around the country, that if we start to see a wave of independence, that could not bode well for them in states like California, where they sort of have a monopoly on things.
We may be having Cox on our show upcoming later this summer. What does he need to do to win?
I think he needs to focus on things that are wedge issues to show the difference between he and Newsom that a majority of people agree with. Gas tax is one of them. The sanctuary city laws. Newsom's all in on these things. And Newsom, the way I looked at it in the Democrat primary, is that we had a liberal in Antonio Villaraigosa, and we have a leftist.
Who you knew?
Yes, I know Antonio. Yes. And but Antonio would actually listen. He's somewhat reasonable on things. Certainly, the unions went after him for a reason, because he's not a puppet to the unions. And so, he was a liberal. But Gavin Newsom is a leftist, where it's he's going to be more liberal than Jerry Brown. Jerry Brown actually was the most conservative power broker we've had in Sacramento in the last few years. He's vetoed a lot of crazy bills that Gavin Newsom would likely sign. So unfortunately, I think Gavin's going to take California even further down the path of liberalism, of big government growth, and craziness.
You're a communications guy. Why wouldn't Cox or the Republican GOP California Party just take a video camera onto the streets of San Francisco and say this is what he wants to do to California? Because it's a disaster now, isn't it?
It's a complete disaster. The homelessness, the shocking number of pounds of feces that are cleaned up. I think they said it was 2,000 pounds a month of feces is cleaned up.
2,000 pounds a month?
It's cleaned up off the streets of San Francisco of human waste. It's a complete disaster in the Bay Area when it comes to that. And you have the highest housing prices in the country. So the gap between the haves and the have-nots is nowhere wider than this liberal city.
But there's an exodus happening, from what I understand.
There's a big exodus happening across California, and the people that are moving in are more of the takers, and the people moving out are the makers.
So you refer to the sanctuary state. California, big issue happening right now. Small cities are voting to join the lawsuit against the state of California, the Trump lawsuit. Okay, you see smaller cities and even larger cities now and counties. Is that a wave? Is that going to continue?
Oh, I think it will. I think that this is a problem people recognize. There's a lot of politics involved in here to try to invoke racism and other things that are really not should never be part of that debate.
Right.
This is a debate about the rule of law and whether or not people who are not citizens of this country should be treated or given granted the same rights as a U.S. citizen.
Yeah.
And in many respects, you have other citizens of the United States don't have the same rights as somebody who's illegally in California. You can pay in-state tuition if you are from Mexico living in California illegally, but you have to stay out of state tuition if you're from Nevada and you move into California to go to school.
My family came in 1977 from England. It took me 12 years to become naturalized. I had a green card, paid taxes as I was working my jobs as a teenager. What is wrong with doing that? Why is that not something that you can say to legal immigrants, this is the way for you to do this without being branded as a racist today? I don't get it.
Again, part of it is just pure politics. It's a way of trying to take an issue and turn it into something bigger than what you really should be talking about, which is the rule of law and how it's being obeyed or enforced. And the idea of immigration is something this country was founded on. We're proud of what we do with immigration, and most of us are immigrants, if you're not a Native American. We come from an immigrant family not that far back. So we are a country of immigrants and want to continue to be so.
Yeah.
But you have to have controlled borders. Everybody in the country in the world can't just have a free license to come to the United States whenever they want. And people that want to escape their own countries, I fully understand. But you can't just have an open door here where everybody who wants to come here can just come here and then take advantage of our welfare programs or all the other infrastructure that's been paid for with our tax dollars and do so without going through some kind of a process.
We just saw the Janus decision with the Supreme Court, which now requires that unions can no longer tax all their members member dues. Most of which I think most people would agree have supported left-wing causes. What does that do for the DNC and the Democratic Party?
Well, I think it's huge. The state of California, within California, unions collect about $800 million a year in union dues. And some of that's, of course, used for their infrastructure. About 10% of that goes into some kind of campaign, whether it's for a local school board or up to governor. So you're talking about tens of millions of dollars that they use for that. But the other thing that they have, because they have union leaders and union members, paid union members across the state, is basically a turnkey political operation in every community in the state. So you can go into a very small town in the middle of nowhere with maybe 300 or 400 people, and you're going to find a member of the teachers union, of SEIU, and these are ground troops for the left and for liberals. And so doing something to dial that back is important. I just saw a measure that is being proposed in California that would basically take the money that unions are losing and have the taxpayers give that to the unions. And
does that have a chance? That's scary.
It may have a chance, but it's basically saying, depending how they frame it. And it basically says, though, that instead of the individuals paying, the state is going to pay those union dues. So they're going to try to find ways around it. And ultimately, even when you think about how unions negotiate, if this much of your money is going to go into union dues and you want to make X dollars, you're basically going to negotiate contracts that take that percentage you're going to be paying to the unions and put it on top of what you expect to make in a salary. So in essence, taxpayers are subsidizing in many cases with public employee unions. We're just subsidizing it as an addition on their paycheck.
That's news to me. I want to learn more about that. You have your ear to the ground. You know many in the Trump White House. The media, if you watch, depending upon which station you watch, they're in total chaos, or they're running seamlessly now and things are moving forward. How is the atmosphere there? Are they optimistic? Are they feeling like they're getting things accomplished? Or are they concerned? What?
I think they feel that they're getting things done. It's, when you go into a role in the White House or in the administration, it's a big job.
Yeah.
And you work long days, long hours. There's a learning curve that a lot of them had when they first went into many of these roles. And so I think as things have kind of begun to settle in and there's been some big changes, but I look at guys like Pompeo. I think he's going to be at the State Department for a long time. And you look at some
He looks good in that role.
He's great in that role, and I think I can't wait to read the book at the end of his tenure at the State Department about all these
secret meetings in North Korea.
and
Holy
things.
cow.
Yeah. So I think there's we're beginning to see things settle a little bit with the White House and people settling into their roles and sort of understanding the best way to operate in the current political environment. So I think there's more of a positive feeling now than there probably was a year ago.
We were chatting briefly last night. Jeff Sessions, does he last the first term?
Well, I think he does. It depends on a number of factors, but it'd be very tough to get anybody else confirmed now. So I think he probably lasts until he decides it's time to go.
Yeah. Another thing we were talking about was just the constant barrage from this White House of just changing the news cycle every single day. You go away to Mars for a week and come back, and there's 7 major things that have happened in that meantime. It's just brilliant what they're doing because they own it. They own it. I mean, what's coming down the pike that we may not be aware of that you're hearing about?
Well, I think some things on the tax front that could have an impact on the upcoming election.
Yeah.
I think there's some things that this administration and Congress know need to happen to make sure that there's enthusiasm with the base going into the election. So I think in the next few months that will be a big part of the narrative. And then, we're going to have a Supreme Court fight here that will get interesting. But I think when you look at the fact that Democrats really don't have a message. It's all about Trump's impeachment or how terrible he is, but they're not coming out and saying, but here's a better agenda and here's what we believe in. And I think that's going to hurt them in the upcoming election. And not just this one. I don't know that they're going to figure in any kind of a real agenda out.
They seem to be throwing this away because it's theirs to win, historically speaking. Right.
Well, when you look, historically speaking, of 18 of the last 20 midterms, the party not in power has gained seats, and I think on an average of like 32 seats, and they need to pick up 25. So.
But I read a report this morning, and I didn't get into it deep. It's just been too busy. But Democrats have registered 12 million more voters in this upcoming cycle. So maybe there's something that's happening under the scenes that we're not seeing?
Well, I think the big discussion is about whether or not there's an enthusiasm gap between Democrat voters and Republican voters. And we know that Democrat voters are highly motivated to turn out because of, their dislike for the president. But I think there is more enthusiasm than people think with the base. And I think that's going to be the case as well if we see some additional tax cuts or something that helps even further stimulate the economy and help people's bottom line. So I think that's the case. But when you look at the at turnout models, they said if Democrats, and this kind of just a generic look across the country, Democrats need to pick up 25 seats, 23 seats that are up this time, where Hillary won the election in that district. So. To get to 25 is, you pick up all of those and a couple more and you're there. And
they gerrymandered Pennsylvania.
Right.
So that's going to go, I think they pretty much have given up those seats.
Yeah. So when you look at the enthusiasm, though, with the primary, the general, thinking is that if Democrats are able to increase their numbers by 4.5%, in comparison with Republicans, that'll give them the margin they need to win a lot of these seats. And so the enthusiasm issue is going to be a big one, and Republicans just need to do their part to give people something to vote for and talk about your successes and point out the emptiness of what the Democrat agenda is.
Is Trump the best message man right now for the Republican Party?
If you're in North Dakota, where he won by 36%, and you want to win the Senate seat there, then yes, Donald Trump is the messenger. If you're in California coastal district that's marginal, you may want to have a little daylight between you and the president. Okay. But I would say overall, he still has the bully pulpit, and he has the ability to turn out massive crowds of people and get their attention. So, in a lot of these races, especially on the Senate side, where you've got, opportunities. And on the Senate side, Democrats are defending 26 seats, Republicans are defending just 8. Of those 26 that Democrats are defending, Trump won in 10 of those states. Mm-hmm. So they have an uphill battle to not lose seats in the Senate. I think, one seat I'm very certain we're going to win is that North Dakota seat for that reason. Okay. Kevin Cramer's been up by 4 or 5 points.
Missouri, Montana, and Indiana.
Missouri, Montana, Indiana, West Virginia. All great opportunities. Yeah. Perhaps Wisconsin. Yeah.
What are one of the issues right now that you don't, because of the news cycles being what they are you don't feel are getting enough of a spotlight on right now that's happening, whether it's the regulatory state across the country and specific states, things that are concerning to you?
One of the biggest things that's concerning to me is just the ongoing extremism of political correctness, particularly when it comes to free speech issues that I care about because of my involvement with media and as somebody who likes freedom. And with our higher education system that is really has become the hotbed of free speech issues and political correctness. This issue in Wyoming now, where the mascot for the University of Wyoming is a rodeo cowboy. Yeah. And they put out some ads recently that said, "We need more cowboys." And they were great ads that were really showing that being a cowboy is about hard work. It's about taking risks and doing the right thing and all this. And they've come under attack by the faculty from the school. The one faculty member, framed it this way. She said, "I'm highly offended by what the word cowboy invokes, because what it invokes is a white, macho male, able-bodied, heterosexual, U.S.-born person." So when you put all that together, that's one of the worst things you can be is a white, macho male, able-bodied. I don't know what she taught, but there was a number of the faculty there that came out and protested it. So when you're dealing with that kind of nonsense and basically taking our young people and putting these crazy thoughts into their heads that you don't want a mascot that would represent an able-bodied person or macho or a U.S.-born person, that the University of Wyoming doesn't want to have a mascot that would represent that.
What you're talking about is essentially that we are at a point where if one person is offended, if one person can take offense or is somewhat discomfort by something that is being said, then what? We just can't talk anymore? We can't say anything anymore? What's the end game here?
Well, it's, the political correctness says that there are, if you line up within the context of what they believe, you can have all the free speech you want. If you disagree with them, you can't have free speech. And there's, this attempt to neuter gender and to act like, it's not. There are certain things that are important about being a male, and there's certain things that are important about being a female, and we don't honor those or want to even respect them. We want to just lump everybody into the same category.
But okay, so you got this extremism on the left, and unfortunately, they're on our universities, and we see it, through other leftist activists. But the meme that's out there, I'm sure you've seen it, and this is why Trump wins. This is why Trump won. Because the silent majority, the middle of this country, are looking at this and just saying, this is insane.
Well, and I think the term silent majority that was used back in the Reagan days, but it's very, very true. When you think about with Trump's election victory, where most pundits said he didn't have a chance, right. And the polls didn't show that he was going to win. And there was that silent majority that came out and voted, and maybe were silent in their support for him, but when they got in the ballot box, they voted for him. And I think that silent majority is something that, again, going back to some of the establishment candidates that are looking at their re-elections and understanding that there is a silent majority was woken up by Trump, and if they continue to stay active and come out and vote, it means guys like maybe a John Cox, who is a business guy, successful business guy, can do better than expected in a state like California.
Well, let's hope so. Where can folks find you, Dave?
Well, I'm on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. A lot of social media stuff. If you just Google my name, David Spady, you'll find various channels.
Yeah, and it's a great feed, as always. I said this to you last time we sat down together. So thanks for everything you do. It's, power brokers behind the scenes. They're making things happen. This is how things happen in this country. So it's good to always get an insight from you. Yeah. Thank you, Dave. Appreciate it.
Good to see you.
And folks, you can continue following us on YouTube at Ricochet.com, America's Voice Network, and don't forget to subscribe to us on iTunes and give us that 5-star rating. I'm Dave Sussman. We'll be back again real soon at Whiskey Politics. Thanks.
Yeah.